There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. It is Samantha with the NVLD project, and we are back this month with another Facebook Live. Very excited today because I have Dr. Marcia Eckerd with us, and we're going to be talking a little bit about social skills and the nuances with social skills in relation to nonverbal learning disability. I'm going to let her introduce herself and talk a little bit about what she does, and then we're going to hop into a little bit of a fireside chat today where we're just kind of going back and forth with some questions and talking about this topic. If you do have any comments or questions or want to ask Dr. Eckerd a question at the end, we will do a Q&A, so please leave those questions in the comments below and we will make sure we answer those at the end. So introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marcia Eckerd. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been doing this over 35 years, as crazy as that sounds. I initially got interested in nonverbal learning disabilities because I was doing neuropsych testing and also being a therapist, and found there was a group of kids I was working with who weren't particularly well understood.
Yeah.
So I got interested in them. And so I've been working with kids who are diagnosed NLD or NLVD and on the spectrum for all that time at this point, both as a therapist and as a consultant going into schools and writing and just all kinds of ways. But I've given a lot of thought to the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. And thank you, by the way, so much for having me on. I'm always thrilled to have a chance to just sort of share ideas. I think that it's really important we do that.
Yeah, and there's just so little kind of documentation around nonverbal learning disability out there. You know, we've got some research papers that have come out in the last few years, but as far as the fact that it's not in the DSM, there aren't a lot of professionals that know about it or know how to treat it. So we always have parents and adults coming to us with questions. And so these Facebook Lives are wonderful because we're able to get some more information into the hands of parents and caregivers. So thank you for coming on because we love to kind of have these conversations and really dig into different, pieces of NVLD. So perfect.
Great.
Well, we're
Yeah,
going to start.
I just, thinking to one thing that you mentioned, just to sort of go take it what you said one step further. And NVLD is the worst named thing in the world.
Yes.
Because it's nonverbal learning disabilities. These kids are not nonverbal. They're very verbal. It's not a learning disability. So and it's actually a neuropsychological profile that's characterized by kids having certain kinds of challenges and strengths. But because it's a profile, it's not considered a psychiatric condition. It's not in the psychiatric book. So if you go to most therapists and say NVLD, they have no idea what the heck you're talking about. And it's also not recognized as a learning disability. So a lot of more educators know about it now, but many don't, it's not necessarily on the list everywhere. So you're kind of in la la land, like, who knows about this? And so so many people say, thank God there's somebody who knows about this, but there are kinds of therapists you can go to. I'll go to that at the end, but
Absolutely.
You're so right. You're so right that there needs to be space to talk about this.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start very basic, and I'm just going to ask, what are social skills? Let's start there, kind of talk about what social skills are, what they aren't, because I think that everybody's understanding of social skills might be a little bit limited, as you and I were kind of chatting about earlier. So tell us what social skills are.
Well, the fact that we're both using nonverbal language and we're nodding and we're doing things like that and smiling at each other, those are all considered to be social skills. I think when people think of social skills, they mostly think of things like, engaging people, introducing yourself, having a conversation, taking turns, making eye contact, having the right facial expression, smiling, all that kind of stuff. But I think one of the things that's particularly relevant for people who have children with NVLD to think about is that ignoring is also a social skill, knowing when to sort of ignore somebody who's being, obnoxious, or being able to let go of something is a social skill. So if you're just as our kids often are, just sort of they've got something in their heads and that's where they're going. And other people aren't picking up on it, but you're going to continue that come heck or high water, then knowing when to let go, it can be a social skill that our kids also have to work on. So there's a wide gamut. And it's basically, all these things that we do interacting socially that kind of display interest, display engagement, and then take things further, get to know people.
Absolutely. And you already kind of touched on it a little bit with the being able to let things go, but how are social skills affected by nonverbal learning disability? What are some of the kind of, I don't want to say consequences, but what are some of the things that you might notice socially in somebody that does have nonverbal learning disability?
Well, I say the nonverbal learning disability, getting into what it is having difficulty reading things that aren't coming to you through the verbal channel. And so it's picking up on what's not said, what's nonverbal, whether it's through body language or whether it's through inference or whether it's sort of unspoken rules that, like, there's a rule that if I wanted your attention, I was behind you, I could tap you on the shoulder, but not on the back of the neck. Whoever taught you that.
Yeah.
So there are these rules about what you do and don't do, or how you go about things that our kids just don't pick up on. And so that's one thing, that these things that aren't actually said tend to get missed. The second, as I mentioned, is that often our kids, the way I describe it is our kids' minds are sort of on train tracks, which is they're sort of going, and instead of being able to sort of pivot when there's something in the way, they might still keep going forward, which can make them very tenacious. And it may, knowing when to stop is also a way that the kids are affected. And being able to generalize is another thing, because the kids who are non have NLD tend to be very detail oriented. That the expression is also, you see every tree but not the forest. And so something that is a skill, like how I greet you in one situation, might not seem the same if it was a different situation. Instead of it being you, it's some guys, and instead of being on an interview with somewhere else, and that may seem like a totally different situation. So things don't necessarily generalize that well.
Okay, cool. So in that way, because you mentioned earlier, whoever taught you to tap on the shoulder versus the back of someone's neck, how can parents or educators or professionals, if they're out there watching this as well, how can we help kids with NVLD learn about these social skills, or how can they be taught? Like, is it through role play? Is it through written instruction? What would you recommend is kind of the best way to teach and learn those skills?
Right. Right. Well, I'm kind of, out on a limb here in how I think about this. So I'm gonna, take a, just sort of say where I'm coming from. I think that was something I used to do way, way back when I started this and didn't know any better, I don't agree with anymore, which is the whole idea of right way, wrong way. There's a right way to do this. And so that when you're going to do this, you do A, B, C, D. And it's all very external. Okay. It's sort of saying, and it's also giving the kid a message that sort of who you are and what your natural inclinations are is wrong. Okay, so I'm being labeled wrong. And at some point, being labeled wrong a lot can begin to have an influence on how you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself, having a certain amount of anxiety that, well, whatever it is I think of, it's probably going to be wrong. And as I said, that even though our kids are very good at rote learning, there's a way in which that kind of thing doesn't generalize. And so, you've taught them to, and there are a lot of curriculums out there that go by teach what is expected behavior. So how do you introduce yourself? How do you greet someone? How do you, all that kind of thing. it's all externally oriented. It's this is the right way to do it. And there's a problem because first of all, we don't want to always be giving our kids the message they're wrong.
No.
Second of all, it can be very different in different contexts. So it's different if you are coming into the church social hall where you're meeting a whole bunch of adults versus if you're joining a basketball team and
Yeah.
you're going to be meeting a bunch of kids your age, or you're going to be doing something else. And so that can be incredibly confusing. And so I think that's important. But and so I think that also, you have kids who are already just navigating the environment, working 10 times harder than anybody else,
Mhm.
just trying to have the flexibility and picking up on, doing things and having the fine motor skills to do them readily and everything. And so this business of constantly having to monitor yourself. Am I doing it right? Do I have the right expression? Am I saying the right thing? Is exhausting.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're already working so hard, it can just be frying to try to remember, okay, I'm supposed to ask 3 questions on topic. Okay. And maybe if you're joining a basketball team, that would be a really dumb thing to do. So I basically have two ways of thinking about it. Okay. One is getting away from the right way and wrong way and thinking in terms more organically of what's inside the child. What does he want to do? What are his goals? If he's coming into a situation where, like, I had one girl who, it was a bunch of kids who had bullied her in the past, and she didn't feel welcome. And the fact was she wasn't. And she was being told she had to go over, she had to put her book down, she had to go over there, she had to greet them. Well, why on earth, if you or I were in a situation where we were with a group of people who hadn't been particularly nice to us, would we want to go over and greet them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that wasn't what she wanted. It was what she was being told to do. So the first question is, what do they want? And if what you want is to impress a teacher, or if what you want is to make a friend, then okay, then what are the ways I can do that? Okay, so
Uh-huh.
it's coming organically from inside the kid, as opposed to, okay, this is what you automatically do by rote because it's what we've taught you.
Yeah.
And so it's coming that way. And if you think about it, one of the examples I use is I tell kids, you have to be an anthropologist. All right. We're gonna pretend we're scientists and we're going to another culture. And believe me, social skills are another culture.
I was going to ask you about this here in just a minute, so I'm interested to see where you're going with it. Yeah.
So let's say we go to Japan. All right. The Japanese often bow. All
Yes.
right. There is nothing inherently good or bad about bowing. Okay. It's a cultural norm. So if you learn about Japan and you learn what role bowing has, and you want to convey respect or you want to convey a certain interaction, you might choose to bow or you might not. But it's not that bowing is right, it's that I want to convey something to you, so I would choose to use this as how I express it. And I have one boy who, was very unsure of how to greet people, and he was learning a very formal way of doing it. He was joining a basketball team. I mean, I really did have a kid who joined a basketball team, and I said, just watch. Observe. How do these kids greet each other? Well, they did it with fist bumps. Now, I'm not going to teach a kid the way you walk into a room is fist bumping the church group or fist bumping your teacher. But if you're walking onto this team, a lot of the communication is physical. Someone does a good job and you slap them on the back. Somebody does something, and it's not all, oh, giving a compliment. Oh, you're doing a really good job. That doesn't work in that situation. So there's a lot of, again, you're observing a culture, learning how that culture works. And so I would teach it from the internal, which is what do what is it you'd like to have in this particular group? What do we know about how you do that there? Well, I had a kid who said, well, I can't talk to anybody, nobody. And I said to do this, and he came back, I can talk to anybody, you know, because if you kind of learn the language, you learn the way people relate, you can begin, and then it's specific to that, to what you want and what that situation is. So I think that's, I tend to now go more, and it's also as a therapist or as a teacher or as a parent, more in alliance with the child.
Yeah.
It's not that you're there and I'm teaching you this. It's more like, what would you like to have happen? Well,
Yeah.
let's figure out together how you can best do that.
Yeah.
I
I
remember
love that approach. I really like that approach of starting kind of almost backwards. What is it that you want to achieve? And then how can we get there? Because I do agree there's no right or wrong. And when you first started talking about that, I was thinking the same thing. So I spend a lot of time in Europe, and the typical greeting is a kiss on each cheek. But like, you're not actually kissing the person's cheek versus a handshake in America. And so it's like, how do you, a handshake is not the right way to greet everyone around the world. And so I think that's a great example of like asking the kid, like, what do you want from this? Let's not force you to be friends with your bullies. Let's give you the tools that you need to make other friends that aren't bullying you and that kind of thing. I really like that approach.
right. And another way to work with a kid, and going with what you said, is how do you figure out who you want to be friends with? You
Yeah.
know, and trying to, who's, a lot of times kids gravitate to the most popular kids who may not be, sometimes they want to take another kid under their wing, but a lot of times, especially if you're middle school or upwards, they have a social pecking order, and if you're not cool, they're not as interested, whereas maybe another kid who's new or is more like you might, or shares your interest, leaning into your interests, leaning into your strengths is one way to meet people who are more likely to be like-minded.
Yeah.
So, it's another thing is helping figure out, like, well, who would I go to? What would I want to do in this situation? So if you, an example, is when a child comes into a lunchroom and they're standing there, where do I sit? Right. And helping them to think about it, helping them think about, well, what are my choices?
Mhm.
What would I want to have happen? And maybe the kid's just exhausted and he needs just some space to be quiet. We can't always say, if I told you, you always have to go seek out a table that's full of people who are going to you're going to have to think about how to talk to them. You might not want to do that if you've had a really rough morning.
Yeah. I was
You
thinking
might,
the same thing when you were saying that. I was like, you're looking around and you see the group that's really loud and talking and there's tons of people, or you see a table that maybe has a couple people reading a book or looking at their homework or something. Like, do you want to put yourself in a situation where you're trying to have a bunch of conversations, or do you want to take that time to kind of decompress and take some time for yourself? Maybe that's the better table, is the one that's a little quieter and can give you that space. So,
yeah,
yeah.
and it depends again on what do you want.
What do you
Do
want
you know
out
what
of
I
it?
mean? Exactly. What do you, if the more boisterous group of kids is sort of where you're at and you have a lot of energy, and but also teaching kids ways of being in that presence. I mean, I've taught kids that that head nodding goes a long way. Yeah, wow, cool, got it. They're kind of filler words, but they indicate listening. So if you go to that boisterous table and you're sitting there and you're not quite sure what to say, you just by doing things like that, oh, that's cool, is in a way being part of it. You don't have to sit there being in anguish trying to figure out what to say.
Yeah.
So kind of teaching kids practical life hacks.
Yeah. Yeah. Versus teaching a social skill or teaching the right way to do something. Yeah. And I like that you said also just the observation as well. When you're in these newer novel situations that you maybe haven't been in before, or you're in a situation that's really similar to when you've been in before, but in a different setting. I think observation does go a long way, just kind of taking a minute to really see what other people are doing. And then, taking that into your own kind of personality and what you want out of the situation and making sure that, you're comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I had one little boy that I was working with at one point who wanted to make friends, and he wasn't sure of how, and so he kind of hired another kid to make friends for him.
I love that.
And so, having a kind of processing where what you're doing is not just telling him about, well, if you want to make friends, but also kind of about social rules that, this kid is actually taking advantage of you
Yeah.
by, asking for candy in addition, in exchange for friend making when that doesn't work,
Yeah.
or the letting go part. He had really strong ideas about what he wanted to play at recess, and other people didn't want to do that. And knowing when do you let go? How do you let go?
Yeah.
Uh, because again, that can get annoying if you're keeping pressing that I don't want to play Foursquare, I want to do that, and everybody else wants to play Foursquare and always has.
Yeah.
So that there's a processing component too that's an important part of teaching. I often will use a whiteboard, and I'll have a kid, and he comes in and he says, nobody likes me, everybody hates me. And I'll actually use my whiteboard and draw out all these little circles that are his class and where do you sit. Okay, what are these kids' names? And then he gets to a place where he doesn't know the names anymore. And okay, well, who doesn't like you? And it's usually like 3 kids. And I said, so these 3 don't like you. How about the other ones around you? Well, they're okay. So 6 kids are okay and 3 don't like you. What about all the rest of these kids? Well, I don't know them. Ah, so, maybe those kids would be okay. Is that possible? And, so you get a very concrete visualization of, oh, there's only a couple kids who are the problems here. And there's all this possibility, which is one thing on a theoretical level. It's another thing when you actually see it. Do you see
Yeah.
what I mean? Or I'll
Yeah.
use a whiteboard to draw out a social situation and help kind of explain, well, where were you? Where was he? What? And it makes it tangible. And a lot of times our kids aren't great at visualizing, right? It's, that nonverbal first. And being able to actually have things made tangible so that you can actually see it, that can be really helpful.
I love that. I was actually working on reviewing our frequently asked questions on the website. And one of the questions was, my son has no friends and has a hard time. How can I help them? So when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that'd be a perfect example for that parent to help their kid understand that it's not everybody doesn't like you. It's that you just haven't met the right person that will like you and be your friend and hang out or advocate for you. And I love that example, just making it tangible, really kind of showing them exactly what the situation is. Because I think that also goes back to kind of seeing the bigger picture and generalizing. They're really focused on these very specific details. And then another thing I was thinking of, because there are so many bullies out there, and I'm an ex-high school teacher, so I have seen everything from kids. And while there are so many bullies out there and there are people that just aren't willing to kind of accept people that are different from them and learn about them, there is such a good side to children, because children are fairly innocent, especially at those younger ages. They haven't quite learned all the harsh realities or been through all those experiences. And I think that there are those kids out there that will, like you were saying, kind of become an advocate or the friend to help introduce. And I think having the comfort level to just ask someone if they can help you. I know at a young age for kids, that's kind of hard and they may not, fully know how to have that conversation. But I do think there are so many good kids out there that will kind of like help out and help guide you. And you see that even in children without NVLD, of just, taking in the new kid or helping somebody, introduce them to your other friends that you've known longer and that kind of thing. But I think there there are both sides to that. And unfortunately, you hear a lot about the bullies, but I do think there are some good kids out there that would help, if you could just figure out how to have that conversation initially.
And teachers especially, I think, can be helpful with that because
Yeah.
teachers get to see all these kids. And one of the things you can do if you see a kid who might be a good with this child as an NVLD is to maybe pair them up on an activity or pair them up on doing an errand. Do you know what I mean? Give them the chance to just sort of be together, not having to initiate it because that can be so hard, but rather just, they're the ones that have to go pick up lunch together, you know, or a snack or whatever. And so that you're kind of facilitating this kid meeting the other kid who would be a good candidate for friend material. And leaning into strengths is a big one. How do you know when someone shares your interest? Well, maybe they're wearing a t-shirt that says, or maybe they're doing something, but being able to to kind of identify who are those people who might be the ones who stick up for you or who advocate for you.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, that'll kind of lead into kind of what my next question was. I talked a little bit about it, but a lot of these social skills in these situations can be emotional. There's a wide spectrum of emotions. They can either make people really happy, they can be stressful and anxious, like you were mentioning earlier. So, how can someone with NVLD, I don't want to say regulate their emotions, but how can they kind of understand the emotions they're feeling and I guess cope with, I don't think cope is the right word either, but how are emotions affected by all of this?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question because, for any of us, if we were going into situations where we didn't quite feel sure of our footing or what to do, we would likely get anxious. And if a kid feels that he or she or they don't have any friends, that can make you feel depressed and kind of lonesome. And especially if that's been going on for quite a while, you can begin to feel kind of less optimistic that it's ever going to happen. And so I think our kids are at risk for anxiety and at risk for potentially depression because they work so hard and they're not getting what they want. And so, for one thing, they have to learn to know what they're feeling in their bodies in the first place. Knowing when am I getting upset? When am I it's because not always aware of those feelings, but also having skill sets like meditation, for example, or like different things. I've seen OTs who are just brilliant at coming up with things for self-calming. I had one kid who stuck his hand in a bucket full of sand. Now, don't ask me. I never would have thought of it, but it really worked for that kid. Another kid would go in the hall and do wall push-ups because exercise and endorphins did more for him. For many kids, it's using the calming exercises that we all think of that are scientifically shown to help reduce stress. But so many people tell me, well, meditation doesn't work. And the thing is, it's totally misunderstood. The first part of meditation is breathing. Well, you're breathing, so that's step one, right? Anybody you're talking to is probably breathing, hopefully.
Hopefully.
The second, the second is having a focus, and everyone thinks it has to be mindfulness, that you're mindful of your breathing or something like that. But before that, it used to be transcendental meditation. And people would say a mantra over and over. And one of the very big researchers, Benson, who studied it, found you could just count to 10.
Mhm.
And then he had kids just say one, and the Hare Krishna people said, "Oh, this is the oneness of the universe." And he said, "No, I'm doing this study with Harvard undergraduates, and none of them can count to 10. So I just have them say one, one, one." So, saying something like, I'm okay over and over, that can be fine. Saying something Sanskrit, no problem. But also I had somebody that I was talking to, and we were discussing this kind of thing. And he said, well, I can't meditate. My wife meditates, but I like to listen to birds. And I said, guess what? Listening to birds can be a focus.
Yeah.
You go out there, you listen to the birds. And then the third part is when your other thoughts come into your mind, you don't fight them. You just say, okay, I'm thinking, and go back to listening to the birds. Walking can be a meditation. Um, Swimming can be a meditation. Knitting can be almost anything that
Yeah.
captures your interest can be a meditation.
Yeah.
So when someone says it doesn't work for me, my guess is you're looking at, you're not using something that grabs you as your focus.
Yeah. I like that. That's really interesting because I'm one of those people that has admittedly said meditation doesn't work for me, but I go on hikes alone and I will walk for miles. And I think meditation, if you kind of think of it of just a wider thing of not just sitting there, like tuning out, it's anything that kind of brings you inner peace, anything that makes your mind not race and relax a little bit. And I love that you said that because it as you're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, all of those things are forms of meditation because they just bring you, bring your heart rate down and help you kind of just level out your emotions.
And if you, again, the third part is if your worries start come into your head, they use the image of clouds going by in the sky or something like that. You don't stick to that. You just go back to enjoying the scenery or the air or whatever you're enjoying about your walk. But the thing that's really helpful is to learn that once you've gotten that established and your body's learned that I can go do this and I feel more relaxed. Let's say there's something stressful, like you're going to interview somebody that you really would rather not interview. and you and you're going to you can just do literally a 1 minute refresher where you just sit down and you breathe just normally and you imagine in your mind going on that walk. Your body's going to react the same way. It's really cool, whether you're actually out there or you're imagining it. So you can do like a mini meditation, and that will help bring you down. So if you have a child who has been practicing whatever works for them in meditation, and then they're in a situation, they can just take, and the nice thing is nobody can see it if you're just breathing normally and thinking inside your head, right? So you can do a mini meditation and nobody realizes that you're doing it. And yet
Yeah.
it's helping to calm you. And people do all kinds of breathing and counting to 10. The bottom line is whatever works for that specific person. It's not everybody has to be mindful. If that works for you, then it's great,
Yeah.
and recognizing that, oh, this is my focus, this is what brings me peace.
Yeah. Amazing. You touched on it earlier and we talked about it a little bit before too, but you were talking about the occupational therapist, so the OT that was helping them come up with these different kind of skills to help them, cope and whatever. What are the different professionals that can help students and parents with NVLD, and in what ways can they help? We've got a couple blogs, we've talked about it before, but I think it would be really helpful to kind of hear again of who can help out there, what can they help with, and then knowing that they may not know about NVLD, how do we find those professionals? We get that question all the time at the NVLD project of how can I find someone in my area? No one knows about NVLD. We've got resources on our site that can kind of explain it to professionals and clinicians, but how would you recommend people find these professionals to assist and help?
Well, one of the things that I explain to people is that the NLVD profile is a lot like the profile of many people, not all, who used to be called Asperger's, who are on the autism spectrum. And if you find somebody who knows about those kids, they have many of the same issues, whether we're talking about inflexibility or social skills or sensory issues or whatever we're talking about, they often have many of the same issues. And they may know specifically about NVLD, they may not, but the fact is they deal with many of these same issues in kids. So a therapist who but not people who deal with profoundly impacted kids. I'm talking about people who deal with the kids who are pretty, who are who are doing pretty well. And but maybe he has some of the same social or same other kinds of issues. So that's for therapists. So speech and language people can be very helpful. Um, OTs can be incredibly helpful. School counselors who know the other kids, or where there's a trusted relationship and they can be an adult you go to and you debrief, or you do what they unfortunately used to call a social autopsy, which is a terrible word, but it's where you kind of go through a situation and figure out what happened.
Yeah.
You know, what went wrong or what went right. It would be nice to have times when you're figuring out what went right.
Yeah.
And so, you have all the, and therapists who help kids express themselves, you know, um, sometimes children, when they feel that they've been rejected for being themselves, get afraid to express themselves. And so art therapists or music therapists or other people like that help bring a child out and feel that I can just sort of get my feelings out there. I have some kids who draw anime, whatever works. But I'd like to throw in here one of the dangers that I think NLVD kids face, which is often they really, really want friends,
Mhm.
but they also can be quite naive,
Mhm.
and they're not picking up on the signals that say this person's insincere, and they're not picking up on this, on the fact that, they're very truthful, the kindest kids in the world, the sweetest kids in the world, very truthful, very, they're not manipulative kids. If they're upset or whatever, then there's something really going on. But so they're not looking for that in other people.
Mhm.
And so as you said, people think of bullies as a problem, but I know I've had issues with kids who get older, whether it's middle school or high school, where they observe kids who are, maybe doing things that are sexual, maybe putting their arm around somebody, or when do you do that, when do you not do that, who is it okay to do that with? Do you know what I mean? Who you can and can't touch, because sexual harassment is such a big issue these days. For girls, who desperately want a friend, some guy says, well, I want to be your friend, and this is what friends do.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure our girls are educated about their bodies and their boundaries, and that it's okay to say no. And that just because someone says they're going to be your friend, if you do this thing that doesn't feel right to you, then go by your gut, go by what doesn't feel right to you.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of social judgment that we really want to help our children have.
Yeah, especially as they get older into that middle school age range, like you were talking about. I think it was a couple years ago, we actually touched on that on another Facebook Live. We were talking about that kind of same situation of like that danger of not fully understanding those situations. And I think that's very important as our girls are kind of entering middle school. And honestly, I feel like everything is happening at younger ages now too. Because when I was in high school, it was a lot different than how high school is now. But yeah, I think that's really important and can be quite dangerous. So, helping especially the young girls and teaching the young men like what's appropriate and what's not appropriate too. So
Yeah. And and most importantly, helping our children appreciate their strengths,
yeah,
whatever they are, because they have them, and the more they can lean into them and the more they can use them and more they can be brought out into the school or whatever community settings there are, the more they feel capable and confident and kind of worthwhile. They take up the space that they have to take up there, because so often kids are defined by their deficits.
yeah,
You are what you can't do. And I say, hey, let's help them think of themselves in terms of what they can do, and the great things that they are,
love that.
and the skills that they have, because they're often quite bright and really skilled in some areas.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Well, we are going to move on to a couple questions that are actually in the comments. We've got a lot of people on our Facebook Live today.
Oh,
Um, so I had one person ask about, and you may or may not know about this, driving. It's a little different than kind of what we're talking about, but they said, what are the possibilities for NVLD driving safely given some of the processing challenges? And are there special training programs available? I'll start really quick. We do have a driving with NVLD PDF that I will share with you, Jeff. I'll post it in the comments, but we had found it on another website with a company that did do some training. So I'll try to get some information. But if you have any advice or help as well, I know that would be appreciated.
well, I think that all of us who drive, if we have decent memories, can remember at the very beginning when you were supposed to look at how fast you were going and look what was ahead and check your rear view mirror and be aware what's happening on the side. It's so much
Much.
information processed at once. And if you have visual spatial issues, which I do, so much of it is visual spatial. How far ahead is somebody? How far on the sides are things? I thought parallel parking was like, this horrific thing that they sent to torture me because I had no idea. And so it takes a lot. I mean, yes, I mean, children on the spectrum can drive and children with NVLD can drive. I think special training, also lots of practice with somebody who's not going to be hysterical. So that might eliminate. You want someone who's calm and the one who gives them a sense of confidence and not a sense that you're 16, so you should be doing this, or there shouldn't. I say there shouldn't be any shoulds. That doesn't make sense, but should is really not a useful word. And you are where you are when you're there, and that's the right time to be there. So if a kid needs extra time to practice and get a sense of confidence, then they do it. And we have to remember that our kids are very rule oriented, and so that they may think that if it says 55, it's 55, or it's 40, it's 40, or gosh, on those smaller roads where it's 25 and nobody's going 25, right? And everyone's behind you and honking, they need to have that calming strategy, but they also need to sort of have our help in understanding how to handle situations. I mean, I can relate to it right now because 2 days ago, somebody bashed into my car. It was one of these people who wasn't looking up and they didn't even brake. Okay. And so
Yeah.
now I am totally paranoid and looking all around me and looking everywhere
Oh my
for who's
goodness.
going to bash into me next. And
Yeah.
so, if you think of our kids as having difficulty integrating multiple channels, then that's the challenge. And the only way you do it, just like learning to ride a bike, is through having it become sort of second nature by doing it.
Yeah.
So a lot of practice. They won't have trouble on the written test, but just a lot of practice.
Yeah. Amazing. Um, we kind of talked about this in the beginning, but I'll go ahead and ask the question, and then if the person that asked it wants to kind of go back and watch, I think we'll just maybe do a quick summary. But how do you help a teen see they're doing things differently without making them feel that they're wrong or like everything they do is wrong, which is what we kind of talked about at the very beginning. But if you could sum that up into, just a couple sentences, what would you say?
Well, I'd say that framing, a lot of it is how we frame things. If we have a tone of exasperation in our voices and say, I've told you, how many times have I told you that you have to say hi to everybody? And somebody says hi to you, and the kid didn't even notice, it didn't even register that somebody said hi or smiled. And so what we want to do is have go with the child, and as we were talking about, having what we're teaching them be organic to them. But also, I remember I once had a girl and I had her actually count how many times people said hi to her in the hallway, and she was shocked. And I had another boy where I talked about, these interactions as being like volleying in tennis. And, you hit something to somebody else. And if they hit it back, then, okay, they're interested and you hit it back. And they say, oh my God, people have been hitting balls in my court for years. And so, finding metaphors, finding ways to talk about these things that don't say you're wrong. It might be, what do you want? How can you achieve it? But it also might be, how do we notice some things that maybe we haven't been noticing?
Yeah. And I think the other piece of that too that you had mentioned was don't always talk about the bad situations, what they did wrong. When they do something that was successful or that, provided positive results, also talk about that so that you're kind of balancing the scale there too. So you're not always saying you're wrong or that was, not the right thing to do. Like you really have to have that positive piece as well.
Yeah, and there's so much good. So that our kids tend to be so kind and so caring and so thoughtful and so many things, and saying, wow, that was so kind of you, you're such a loyal friend. I mean, having them value themselves for what they have to offer and their own worth is so important.
Absolutely. Perfect. So it looks like we've got two more questions. We'll see how we can answer these. So, what treatments have been proven to help adults with NVLD? Is there anything new that seems promising? I know that's kind of like a very, specific question, and not sure if there is a specific treatment because we know there's, not drugs out there or anything like that. But let's just maybe switch it to adults. What could adults do to kind of help as well? I've kind of focused on children a little bit, but for adults.
Well, first of all, I do know that some people do visual training or things like that to try to work on some aspects. I don't know particularly that one treats NVLD. It's kind of how you're wired. People are talking now a lot about neurodiversity, and we don't expect everybody to have brown hair or blonde hair or be white or be, or have this certain talent, musical talent or whatever. We expect people to be diverse, and the way we process is diverse. And so I think that one doesn't necessarily cure somebody, cure somebody of processing differently. But the question is, what do we, it may be that somebody needs treatment for anxiety or for depression, or somebody may need someone with whom to do the kind of processing we've been talking about. And that might be a counselor at school, it might be a therapist, it might be, but the advantage of someone at school is they know the cast of characters, right? And so they know who really is mean and who our kids are misreading.
Yeah.
But a therapist too can help explore, how to understand things. And I used to have kids watch videos and turn off the sound and just use what we see to figure out
That's
how
interesting.
people are relating, and things like that. And so there are, it's not so much, if you're an adult, I would say, well, what's your concern? What are the issues? What's getting in your way?
Yeah.
And then how do we deal with that? Is it emotional regulation? Is it reading the situation? Is it knowing how to navigate a particular kind of thing? And then we find somebody who can help us do that,
Mhm.
as opposed to sort of treating an NVLD as if that was a
Just
thing.
one piece, the one big
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Well, and it
Yeah.
takes me back to what you said at the very beginning. What is the goal? What is your goal in the situation? Is it something that is, there's different aspects of NVLD, like you're just saying. So what is the goal? Which thing or which, struggle or which strength are you trying to improve upon that, you want to, I'm not
Right.
going to say cure, but like, that's, kind of
Yeah.
like, what
Oh,
is it,
like
what is it that you want out of it too?
yeah,
So.
like maybe you have a partner and you and your partner are trying to come to some kind of understanding,
Mhm.
and your partner can't understand why you're so inflexible. Why is it that, when you made up your mind about something, it's sort of what some people call my way or the highway, and or they may not seem to listen, and helping people understand different neurotypes, so to speak, And, and it can be difficult to be flexible, but if you're working at understanding that this person's view is as important to them as my view is to me, and then to understand that sometimes people need advance warning to be more flexible. And, so having an understanding of each other's neurotypes and how we function. And neurotypes, that sounds very fancy, but kind of how do we function? How do we understand things? I mean, if a kid who's NVLD takes things very literally, the partner's not necessarily, and the partners, let's give them make them ADHD. So so they say something really kind of off the cuff, and our guy's taking it very literally, then you have a built-in argument there, right? Because one is saying, well, I didn't mean that. And the other one's saying, well, but you said this. And, again, that remember being able to let go is a social skill. It's like being able to understand that maybe your partner didn't exactly mean that as the be all and end all. Maybe that was an expression of anger or some feeling. And so it's helping couples navigate, processing differently, that I think is also meaningful to NVLD adults and or employers as well. There may be an employer who says things that aren't clear enough, aren't direct enough, and being able to self-advocate for what you need. If someone's just sort of angry at you because you're not inferring what they want you to do, well, that's just not going to work. And maybe you say, look, I really think I can do this job well, but I need clear directions. Okay, I need to know exactly what you want me to do. And maybe we can set up a timeline for doing it. Then maybe you'll be a whole lot more successful there. So when we talk about helping adults, what we really want to know is with what, right?
Yep.
Just as you said.
Yeah. Love that. We've got a couple more questions in the comments. Some we have touched on already, some we have actually touched on other Facebook Lives. So I'm going to go in and just answer those separately. But if there are any questions that come across that maybe myself or our executive director, Paula, isn't able to answer just based on kind of all of these that we've done in the past, we might email them over to you if that's okay. And then we can get some responses and help everyone out. But this was wonderful. I love talking to different people every month on these Facebook Lives, because you always kind of get a little bit different perspective or different anecdotes that you can discuss and kind of, different strategies. So it's been really helpful because I've learned a lot on this one and kind of learned some different ways to talk about things and how to approach, a lot of these parents that are emailing us asking for help. And, we're not professionals. We're not clinicians or scientists here at the NVLD project. So we rely strongly on the community that is practicing and kind of coming up with this. And this was really wonderful. I appreciate you joining us today and imparting all your knowledge upon us.
Well, you guys probably have my contact information. Yes. But also I have a website, which is marciaeckerd.com, kind of the original, right? But there's a way to email me through there.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, I'll put a link to your website in the comments for everybody that is watching or comes on and watches later, because a lot of parents will actually log on later tonight or in the next few days and rewatch this. So I will definitely put your URL down in the comments